we actually have some breaking news, new information from WCCO's law enforcement sources and our Esme Murphy about the groups that are causing unrest in the cities. Esme?
Well, obviously, Amelia and Frank, this is all a rapidly unfolding story, but we felt it was important for our viewers to know that while the violence has so far been contained to certain neighborhoods in the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, that could change. Multiple law enforcement sources tell WCCO they have intercepted intelligence that these horrifying scenes we've seen for the past few nights in Minneapolis and St. Paul could in fact unfold in other communities in the Twin Cities area. Specifically, multiple law enforcement sources tell WCCO they are concerned anarchist groups could try and expand their damage zone to other parts of the Twin Cities that have not yet been touched. This information is coming from law enforcement sources outside of the city of Minneapolis. The same sources tell us that law enforcement is monitoring anarchists online, monitoring their web traffic and chat rooms. These groups are trying to organize more people to come to Minneapolis and other key cities where violence has erupted, including Los Angeles and Atlanta. Today, WCCO has seen National Guard movements in the suburbs. Now, we should be clear and say that doesn't mean these specific areas are targeted. Also, multiple Twin Cities suburban communities have also implemented 8 p.m. curfews for tonight. Some had curfews last night, others have added them tonight. And additional sources we have talked to say that this is in part because of concerns that incidents could occur in these other communities. Again, we have no indication that any specific communities have been targeted, but we wanted to let you and everyone watching know that this is a possibility that there may be disturbances outside of the areas we've already seen. This news is reason for everyone as law enforcement is urging to abide by tonight's 8 p.m. curfew, even if it's not in your community. But if you check, an awful lot of communities outside of Minneapolis and St. Paul also have just added 8 p.m. curfews.
Esme, can we talk about this and break down a couple things? Because,
sure.
It's so, I mean, the fact that law enforcement is overwhelmed, not that they're not trying, but they're mathematically overwhelmed, is really, really concerning, and it led to the horror that we saw on Wednesday, Thursday, and last night as well. I just have to imagine that if you talk about expanding the geographical area of the protest and the anarchy, now you're stretching a force that's thin, razor thin, that could be potentially really horrible.
Well, Frank, I agree with you, and I think that's one of the reasons these groups are targeting and trying to get more people to come here. It's a warning, it's a concern that law enforcement does have, and if you are watching these horrible scenes, I think it's relatively easy to say, oh, that's that section of Minneapolis or a section of St. Paul, and what our sources are specifically telling us is that law enforcement knows there is a possibility that other communities that haven't been touched yet could be targeted. And not every community has an 8 p.m. curfew in place, but an awful lot do, and there's a reason they do. They want to be able to make sure that their streets are safe and that no one is out and about in their communities that isn't supposed to be there. And so just look up your city's website and see if they have the 8 p.m. curfew, and even if they don't have it, and actually there are more cities that are starting to add 8 p.m. curfews than don't have it, I think. But just be careful and go inside and watch out and be careful. This is a very, very serious situation. Some sources that I have talked to say that at the federal level, this is being compared to only two things: the Rodney King riots in 1992 and the riots in 1968. In this country that were widespread. I mean, this is how far we have to go back. This is how explosive this situation is. And nobody, no matter where they live in the Twin Cities area, basically should take this for granted.
No, as you said, it's an extremely dangerous situation now. Did your law enforcement sources that you spoke with, did they talk about in these areas outside of the Twin Cities, are they mobilizing to equip themselves to somehow handle this?
Well, I think it's really on the backs of local law enforcement and these local law enforcement communities, and they are preparing local law enforcement, local police departments. It's so difficult, and this is, again, when I talk about the Rodney King riots in 1992, and we have viewers that weren't even born in 1992. I remember them. One thing that law enforcement is saying is the problem with those riots is while they were centered on a place, an area of LA called Koreatown, they spread beyond that. And law enforcement had no idea where they would pop up, and that's what was so dangerous. And that's why there were so many fatalities and so many injuries and so much damage. You know, in 1992, $1 billion worth of damage in LA, which was, again, that's a long time ago, you know, almost 30 years ago. So it really is a volatile situation, and I think it just behooves everyone to be very careful. And if you can, if you don't have to work, please stay inside tonight.